got some things wrong about the Vikings. Tears of the Wolf is very much inspired by Anglo-Saxon and Viking history. I've done gobs and gobs of research, but it is still very much a fantasy romance book. I'm sure there are some historical errors that are just plain mistakes or misunderstandings on my part, but some are deliberate. Here are a few of the deliberate errors. 10 things I got wrong about the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons in Tears of the Wolf. Number 1 is the longhouses. I did make sure to include servants who are watching all of the fires inside the house 24/7 after Professor Howard Williams pointed out that Anglo-Saxon houses would have had that. So in the book, there's a central fire in the main structure. And pretty much everything else I describe about the longhouse is non-historical. I ended up making my own layout and design for the longhouse that's in the book because trying to confirm a whole bunch of little minute historical details started to be really difficult. It started to bog down writing the story. I also wanted Bryn and Cenric's Happy Fun Time scene to be in their own private space, so I added like a master bedroom type thing. Number 2 is longships. So the only 100% historical things I describe about the longships is first, there are detachable heads on the prow. One design is for attack, another design is for when they are in friendly waters. The second thing about longships that I described is that in Viking naval warfare, the goal would be to capture your enemy's ships instead of sinking them. But the overall design of the longships that I describe is my own invention. It was something else that really started bogging me down when I tried to go deep into it. So I just glossed over details in this book at least. Number 3 is the Viking raiding season. In Tears of the Wolf, we find out that the Valdari raid in the summer and then sometimes in the late fall. In reality, most Vikings were farmers for most of the year. So the real Vikings typically only raided in summer. In the spring, they would be busy planting. In the autumn, they would be busy harvesting, and in the winter, the sea became impassable. But I needed the risk of a Valdari raid in autumn for the plot. So I had the risk of a Valdari raid in autumn for the plot. And I made up a justification that kind of made sense to me. Number 4 is Viking weddings. I wanted to make it clear to the reader that Bryn and Cenric's marriage was based on politics and exchange of property. So the wedding scene is designed to emphasize this. There are 12 witnesses on Bryn's side and 12 witnesses on Cenric's side, and that is a reference to real Anglo-Saxon law codes, but everything else that you will read in that wedding scene is made up. Contrary to what wedding websites want you to believe, we don't actually know what a real Viking wedding entailed. There are some scattered references in Christian sources that talk about this practice of hand fasting, which is referred to marriage in the Danish way, and that's pretty much it. We have no idea what a Viking wedding during the Viking Age would have looked like. We can make guesses and we can infer things. Modern interpretations of hand fasting have also been really romanticized in modern pop culture. And like I said, I didn't want anything about Bryn and Cenric's wedding to feel romantic. There is some reason to think that witnesses might have been part of the Viking wedding night, but I did not want to include that. No, thank you. Number 5 is manual labor. I have read a lot of fantasy books that really gloss over just how much work goes into not starving in a pre-industrial agrarian society. So I really wanted to emphasize the work in Tears of the Wolf. The book takes place in autumn, mainly during harvest. So both Bryn and Cenric do a lot of physical labor with their servants. This is another thing that was a little harder to research, but from what I have been able to find, Anglo-Saxon/Viking people of Bryn and Cenric's status wouldn't have been doing as much, if any, manual labor themselves. So I just made it a point of mockery and criticism from some of their peers and called it a day. Number 6 is servants, or the lack thereof. Bryn and Cenric have a lot of servants and attendants surrounding them in the book. I was going to try and add more servants to make it more accurate, but that became unmanageable. Managing that many names and characters got really cumbersome. At the same time, just having them surrounded by nameless, faceless servants kind of felt icky. Ergo, I ended up combining a few characters in the final version. From what I have read, people of Bryn and Cenric's status would probably have been surrounded by servants constantly. And as an introvert, being constantly surrounded by people sounds like my literal idea of actual hell. And again, I wanted them to have their spicy fun times in private. So no servants in the room when that is happening. Number 7 is Bryn and Cenric's ages. Brynn is 23 at the start of the book. We find out that she was 17 when she was married off for the first time. From what I have found, a Viking or Anglo-Saxon woman of Brynn's status would have been married off at more like 14 or 15. I aged her up to 17 at the time of her first marriage, and she would have been around 21 when that first marriage was consummated. 23 for Brynn worked for me because I think it's still tragically young for her to have gone through everything she's gone through, but at the same time, she's still an adult to us. Cynric, on the other hand, was aged down. So from what I have been able to find, it was not very normal for an Anglo-Saxon man to become an alderman in his 20s, but Brynn deserved a man her own age. So again, I just made Cynric's age a point of mockery and criticism among his peers and called it a day. Number 8, non-alliterating names. For the record, I tried to have historically accurate alliterating names for related characters, but my editor was not having any of it. And it confused early readers in Elizabeth's Legion, and it confused me too, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. So I ended up making changes. But the Anglo-Saxons were obsessed with alliteration. One of their favorite obsessions was giving all of their kids names that alliterated with their father's name. I did outright name a few characters after their dads, but in those cases, I made sure that the dads were dead to make things simpler. Number 9 is the religion. I have my own religion/pantheon in this series. Several of the characters serve different patron deities, but there is an overall religious tolerance that you typically see in polytheistic traditions. Brynn worships a deity with Hecta/Femina Dea vibes. I gave Cynric a patron goddess of foretellings and nightmares with the personality of an angry chihuahua because I thought it would be funny. It is extremely difficult to draw any concrete conclusions about pre-Christian Norse religion. Most of what we know about Norse religion comes from this guy, Snorri Sturluson, who was a Christian living almost 200 years after the Viking Age. While huge strides are being made through archaeology and historical research, even the world's foremost scholars on Norse religion constantly use words like we think, maybe, possibly, likely. No one can guarantee an accurate depiction of Norse religion because there is no way for us to verify most of the records that we have. Outside of archaeology, all of the records that we have of Norse religion were all recorded by Christians who had their own agendas and their own priorities in recording it at the time. Number 10 is magic. Brynn is a sorceress, and Cynric can communicate telepathically with his dogs, and he also has visions of the future. I don't think I need to explain this one. If you would like to learn more about the real history that inspired this book, you can find my list of recommended research books for this series by going to bookshop.org/shop/bookgoblin. As for Tears of the Wolf, it is going to be releasing to the public on February 21st, but you can get access a week early on February 14th by becoming an early bird VIP. Check out the link in the description.